Hey, welcome back to the About the Labor podcast here at VikingsTerritory.com. I am BJ Reidell, back here with my guy Drew Mahowald, and OTAs are wrapping up. We are getting right into the midst of the part of the offseason now where literally nothing is going on, not just stuff that we can talk about, like organized team activities, literally nothing for the foreseeable future here. So we're going to continue our positional breakdown in the NFC North rankings. Today we're doing wide receivers and tight ends. We're also going to talk about a quick article that I read. I briefed, I guess. I read the Vikings portion of it, and we're going to kind of talk about what that message was that he had and our reflection on that. And then we'll finish up with the Take 5. We're going to do the top 5 Vikings, in our opinion, similar to like the NFL Network's top 100. Literally the 5 players that are the best in our personal opinion. So that's what we'll finish out with that Take 5. So let's just jump right into this, Drew. I briefed you on this just before we hopped on here. This article that I read, it's on Bleacher Report. It's by a guy named Brent Sobleski. He's listed as a Bleacher Report analyst. I personally am not too familiar with that name. I believe I've seen it before, but I'm not too familiar with his work. He wrote an article about every team's greatest weakness, their fatal flaw, their Achilles heel, if you will, for the Greek mythology people out there. And what he listed, I'll read a quick excerpt from it so everyone's kind of on the same page here and knows exactly what we're talking about. He listed for the Vikings as their number one concern, their fatal flaw, the thing that could break their seasons back, is a missing piece along the defensive front. And he didn't elaborate a whole lot on that, but that's the basic gist of it. So, I guess the first question here is, Drew, do you agree with him that that's the number one fatal flaw on the Vikings defense, on the Vikings team, not just their defense? And if not, or if so, why not?
No. On the defensive line, no. I think he's probably looking way too much into the Sharif Floyd news, and
yeah, he did make note of that in the post.
Right. So he's one of those national guys that probably doesn't pay a whole lot of attention to the Vikings. To be honest, he's more of a cover all his bases on all of the teams. I assume. I guess I don't know about this guy very much, but he doesn't know about the fact that they brought in Dayton Jones from Green Bay, who can. He's initially listed in Green Bay as actually it's outside linebacker, if I remember correctly,
yep,
in that 3-4. But he's got the measurables and the size and the experience to play a 3-tech. And then they also brought in Jaleel Johnson, a very good value as at defensive tackle at Iowa. So, and they just added Will Sutton too. So they brought in a lot of these interior pieces, and they're not going to be studs by any means. Maybe they don't have the talent that Sharif Floyd had, but I feel like, given the depth that they now have at that position, you could argue that that's the deepest position on the defensive line.
Yeah, I would argue that, actually.
On the defense, the deepest position on the defense. So, I think that he's way off here. I think there's plenty more holes or, bigger weaknesses that could be addressed that will hurt the Vikings more than this one.
Yeah, I personally disagree with him as well. I think that maybe towards the beginning of the offseason, back when Sharif Floyd's initial announcement was made, and that he was potentially his career might be over, and then the Vikings had not signed Dayton Jones yet, they hadn't signed Will Sutton yet, and they hadn't drafted Jaleel Johnson yet. Maybe at that point during the offseason, then yeah, I would say that this is a big issue for the Vikings. Has it ever been the kind of the backbreaker, quote, the Achilles heel? Not in a really long time. Defensive tackle has been kind of a strength for the Vikings for 60 years. 60 years. Think about the defensive tackles that have came through the Vikings system. Just right now, Linval Joseph's one of the very best in the league. Sharif Floyd, obviously, everyone remembers the Williams wall. Both Kevin and Pat, very great players. Before that, you can go all the way back to Alan Page.
Chris Hovan, John Randall.
Yeah, this has always been... Yeah, exactly. Chris Hovan's hilarious. Jordan Reed actually brought him up as one of his honorable mentions for players that he really liked when we were talking about that a couple shows back. So, yeah, Chris Hovan's hilarious. He was a real dog. That was the definition of a dog.
Oh, yeah.
For sure. So, yeah, I don't think this has ever been an issue. Honestly, at least as long as I've been a Vikings fan, the defensive tackle spot's never interior piece on the defensive line, even the exterior. If you want to give him a little bit of leeway here and say that he was also talking about the entire defensive line, I mean, the defensive end position is maybe the deepest on the roster in terms of overall talent and just if you lose one guy, how you replace it. I mean,
right.
This is an extremely talented group overall on the defensive line, Andre Patterson's group. I just can't get on board with anything he's saying here. I mean, I don't mean to be disrespectful to his work, but it's just not accurate as far as I'm concerned. Again, it's a subjective take. Obviously, he's entitled to his own opinion. My personal opinion, the backbreaker spots are the very obvious one, the offensive line, which I feel like he, as a writer, was probably trying to get away from the offensive line because it's so obvious.
It's the obvious take that he's trying to
everyone's
give something
written
different,
about it.
Give some variety. Yeah,
everyone's pissed all over the Vikings offensive line already, so I can get on board with him there. But even if you don't choose the offensive line, I would say linebacker is probably the backbreaker here, and the reason why is the same thing I've been harping about for how many months now? The fact that Ryan Swoop was able to terrorize the Vikings linebacker crew when they were forced into their 4-3. That's the backbreaker. I mean, you saw what the Indianapolis Colts did. You guys were watching that game for at least a half. I mean, I personally, and I don't do this often, so this takes a good strong man to admit it. I actually turned that Vikings game off after the third quarter and rewatched it later on because I just wasn't. It wasn't my thing. So that's, in my opinion, that's the Achilles heel right there. Green Bay exploited it. Indianapolis exploited it. Arizona did to a degree. Detroit did twice with Eric Ebron. I don't know, man. I would say that's probably the Achilles heel because I really do think that Mike Remmers and Riley Reif shore up those bookend spots enough to make it not a backbreaker anymore.
I'm not in that camp with you. I don't think I can't trust Reif and Remmers to shore things up to that extent.
Let's simplify it then. Who do you trust more? Riley Reif, Mike Remmers, Edmund Robinson. Honestly, my answer to that is Riley Reif is the guy I trust the most from that group.
Right, I agree with that.
And then it's a toss-up between Mike Remmers and Edmund Robinson. And right now, I'm taking Remmers.
But the thing is, these Reif and Remmers are on the field for every offensive snap.
Right, that's true. Yeah.
That third linebacker spot we're talking about, they're on the field for 33% of the defensive plays.
True.
So the Achilles heel, I mean, I think the offensive line hurts the Vikings right now more than that third linebacker spot does, I guess.
Yeah.
Because I think a lot of those tight end situations we talk about, it's not always necessarily on that spot. Last year it would have been Chad Greenway maybe,
Anthony
or
Barr
whoever
as well.
It's also on Anthony Barr. It's also on Kendrick. It's also on Harrison Smith a couple times last year.
It was as well.
And Sendejo, of course, yeah. So it's not always on this third linebacker spot whereas on the offensive line, those bookends,
he's always staring
it's
across.
Pretty clearly, it's
a
pretty
one-on-one
clearly their fault,
matchup,
especially last year.
Okay.
Right, you got Clemmings, Searles last year that was they were the guys getting targeted. So, and these guys, they're solid as run blockers. They're both maulers in that aspect, but as pass protectors, lots of question marks.
Okay, so I think we've established our 1 and our 2 in the offensive line, particularly the bookends, and then also the outside linebacker spot in the 4-3 when they get forced into their base defensive look being a problem. And this guy listed defensive line, which both of us had vehemently disagreed with. Is there a third issue, Drew? I mean, everyone knows that offensive line is going to be an issue potentially, and everyone knows that this linebacker spot is potentially an issue. Is there any other spot that kind of jumps out to you, like, if one guy gets hurt, man, this is going to be a crapshoot?
I think that slot cornerback role, I wouldn't say that the Vikings are doomed already, or like we should be concerned already, because we don't really know what Mackenzie Alexander will bring yet.
Are you in a camp that trusts Mackenzie Alexander, or are you wary?
I want to see it first. Is kind of where I am. So I'm not going into the season thinking it's already set. But if he goes down, then what do? Do you put 40-year-old Terrence Newman in there, or do
Trey
you?
Robertson, Trey Waynes.
You don't really have another guy.
Waynes has played exclusively on the outside. Rhodes has played very limited snaps in slot. I mean,
right. You don't have another guy. You don't have another guy in that mold if Alexander goes down,
right?
That you can really trust. So that's my only real other concern besides
I'll give you one.
That linebacker spot in the offensive line.
I'll give you one here. I agree with you that Mackenzie Alexander is a question mark, but that's a hill that I decided to die on last year when I kind of attached my football resume to Mackenzie Alexander last year when I argued him over Von Bell. So that one's not one I'm worried about. One position I am worried about, and I think this is kind of underrated reason to be worried about it. Adam Warwis actually has preached this multiple times, so shout out to him. We've been shouting him out a lot. He must say a lot of smart things. The tight end group.
He's kissing up to the boss.
Brown-nosing a little bit, yeah. The tight end position, though. Kyle Rudolph, Bucky Hodges, and David Morgan are your three tight ends right now, the main ones. Okay. Then there's Truesdell as well. Truesdell's probably going to get cut. Let's just be realistic here. Bucky Hodges is, as we've stated, he's a wide receiver. He's just a wide receiver listed as tight end. Yeah. And we don't really know what we have in David Morgan. I'm very confident that he will fulfill that Klein Saucer role very well. Absolutely. I think he's got great hands too. I think he can actually be a pass-catching tight end with a well-rounded skill set, to be quite honest with you. We haven't seen it yet, so that's a projection, not a certainty. And then Kyle Rudolph is the final one, and he's really what holds that entire group together. If Rudolph's healthy for 16 games, you can mix and match with Hodges and Morgan as you want with 2 and 3 tight end sets. But if Rudolph gets hurt, and let's not pretend like he can't get hurt, because this is a guy that has dealt with injuries in the past. What do? David Morgan's probably your number one tight end at that point, you would assume, because he's been around for a year or so and knows the offense more, and he has a more well-rounded skill set and that he can block and catch. Bucky Hodges is, again, he's situational right now until he learns how to inline block. That position goes to shit real quick if you lose Kyle Rudolph. So that would be, it wouldn't be an Achilles heel because it's tight end. How much does tight end position actually affect your team as a whole? Probably not a whole lot relative to other positions at least. But that's a position to at least keep an eye on as more of a flaw than defensive tackle, in my personal opinion.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think that's fair. I wouldn't put it ahead of like backup, I guess, safety depth.
That's another good one too.
If Sendejo or Harrison Smith would go down,
we saw what happened when Sendejo went down, and also Harrison Smith. Jaron Kearse comes in, and then
even when Anthony Harris was in there too, he's a guy I really like, Anthony Harris.
I'm optimistic on both
he kind of
underperformed.
He underperformed a little bit last year from what I saw when he was in replacing one of those two guys. So there's question marks there, and there's a reason the Vikings have kind of addressed that, bringing in some extra competition there with Tommy Armstrong, and then they brought in the safety in the draft and Tocho. So
that's something we can touch on real quick. Tommy Armstrong. We haven't talked about him. Let's talk about Tommy Armstrong a little bit here. I'm in Nebraska. Okay, so I've said this before on the show. I don't know if any of you guys were listening, but if I had to pick a college football team, yes, I'm a Minnesota native, but I went to Marquette University in Milwaukee, and that didn't have a football team there. And one of my best friends, one of my roommates, and a guy that he coaches football at Hamlin now, huge diehard Big Red fan, huge diehard Nebraska fan. So what I watched on Saturday was what he wanted to watch because we shared a TV. And that was Nebraska football. So I watched quite a bit of Tommy Armstrong. Again, he was playing quarterback when I was watching him, and he wasn't a very good quarterback in my personal opinion, so it makes sense that he's transitioning to safety in order to prolong his football career. What are you seeing from Tommy Armstrong? I can give you, I'll break him down from what I can tell, but again, we've never seen this guy play safety before. He's never himself played safety before in a competitive football game. So what is there to expect here? Is this just a camp body?
Well, he's clearly an athlete, but I think one thing that might be overlooked is that the fact that he did play quarterback, he kind of knows
defenses.
From he has that perspective as a quarterback what what safeties do. Right. Yeah. So from that angle, I think he'll have an advantage.
That's a really great point.
in his mindset and kind of how his perspective will be a lot different than what these other safeties will have. So at least at the very least,
good point.
He'll bring that. He'll bring that, and then he might not have the instincts and whatever to play safety like the other guys, but I think at the very least he'll bring that perspective and that angle, and then hopefully that can kind of have an impact on these guys like Kurse and Harris and Tocho and these other guys that are vying for a spot.
That's an interesting thing. I mean, it's like I said, I just said it 3 different times, but that's a great point that you're making here.
Yeah.
How the quarterback position, just playing it, how that translates to understanding other positions as well. If there's any position that a quarterback zeroes in on, and I mean, I never played quarterback, but from my vantage point, if there's a position that a quarterback is always looking at to make sure, it's first of all the Mike linebacker, which is why they always call out the Mike linebacker.
That's pre-snap usually.
That's pre-snap stuff. But once you drop back, and let's say you're dropping back, doing a 5-step drop, obviously if it's a 3-stepper, it's a quick drop and sling kind of thing. But if you're doing a 5-step and you're, surveying the field, so to speak, you know who you're watching. It's that deep safety. And when you see quarterbacks use their eyes to look off safeties, that's something that guys like John Gruden always point out during the broadcast. Looking off safeties is because that's the last line of defense. It's the guy that the quarterback cares the most about, because if he's throwing 15, 18, 20 yards deep, he's got to know where that safety is and how quickly he can recover from his position, assuming he wants to throw the ball to which section of the field. So I think that's a really important aspect that Tommy Armstrong does bring, especially because Jack Tocho is incredibly smart. That will be a good mix between getting him up to speed as a safety. I mean, they'll be vying for a spot together, but I think that's two good minds working together. And hopefully, like you said, that could rub off on Jaron Kurse a little bit, who obviously has the physical frame. I called him Terminator last year. I'm hoping that nickname sticks around for a little bit longer. And I'm hoping he sticks around for a little bit longer as well. But if you give, Jaron Kurse a NFL caliber intangible mindset, he looks pretty good on paper as a safety. So, like you said, I think this is a good pickup for the Vikings. I think it's a little weird that they shrugged off signing him earlier and now they're bringing him in now. And they released a wide receiver.
Mitch Matthews. I wonder if something happened with him maybe, or if there was just a change of mind, or what.
I think it's a change of mind thing after signing Michael Floyd. I think this is a ripple effect after signing Floyd, because
that's
they kind of
a good point. Yeah,
it narrows down that competition at wide receiver, where safety. I mean, wide receiver is pretty much set with the top 4 or 5 guys are pretty set at the back end there.
Yeah.
I mean, Stacey Coley and Jarius Wright,
Adams.
obviously. Adams, yeah. But it's pretty much set for the most part. Isaac Frickty as well. Let's throw his name in there. But it's pretty much set. Safety, it's Harrison Smith. Andrew Sendejo is going to be on the team. But after that, I mean, Exum, Harris, Kurse, Tocho.
That's right. I forget about Exum.
I mean, he's become kind of the guy you forget about because he's been in the tub. But there's a lot of depth there and a lot of question marks. I don't expect Tommy Armstrong to be an answer in terms of a 53-man roster spot, but maybe he could land on a practice squad and develop his skills a little bit, because this guy is an athlete. He's an excellent athlete. He wasn't a great quarterback in terms of throwing the ball around at Nebraska, but he was very good at mobility, extending the plays. He
was a good football player. Really.
Yes, yes.
In the most vague sense of the term.
Yes, in the sense that the terminology that they use for high school recruiting, he's an athlete. He doesn't have a position. Yep. He's just an athlete, and he's a very good athlete. So we'll see what happens. But again, my personal take, I don't see him being anything more than a camp body, practice squad possibly. But I think there's a reason why they didn't sign him initially when he kind of thought he was coming originally about a couple months ago. And now they're signing him now after signing Michael Floyd. So I would take that with a grain of salt.
Yeah, I think he's just playing for a. He's going into camp preseason, trying to get a job somewhere. Not
he's trying to put film out for teams,
right?
Because he's never played safety
That's
before.
What all these guys are doing, really. So
that is the Tommy Armstrong update. If you're not familiar with him, you're going to be. You'll be joining all of us because everyone starts. What's that?
So I have a question for you. I'm just curious, and maybe it's worth discussion on the show. Maybe it's not. How was going to college at a non-football school? Because I feel like, at St. John's, football is a big deal.
Yeah,
and I feel like it'd be really weird not going to Marquette. It's a big deal. All right,
I understand
for how small the school. Yeah,
I understand. I toured at St. John's. St. John's was one of my possibilities as well. The schools that I narrowed it down to, it came down to Syracuse and Marquette for me. I ultimately decided to stay close to home, and that was kind of my final reason. But football did come into I considered it because, when you're 18 years old, what are you really looking for in a college? You're looking for something that you can afford, a, quote, good school that is reputable and, will look good on a resume.
Yeah.
And you're looking for entertainment. Where are your friends going? Where are the best parties at? The bar scene. What's it look like? Marquette had all those things for me except for football. And yes, it sucked not having a football team because how much fun is... I've gone to Tommy Johnny before. I went up to Madison for a couple games. I did a lot of college football action stuff. I went to Wisconsin, Minnesota when they were playing for the Axe, and it was actually... I actually left that game because my toes were frozen. But point being here, it doesn't make a whole lot of difference to me because I was able to go to other teams' events. Milwaukee...
That's fair. I was just curious.
Yeah, it's... People ask me that a lot, honestly. And it does take its toll because you do have to pick your own college team. But if you're Division III, you're still picking a Division I school as well, I would assume, right?
Yeah, I root for the Gophers. I root for South Dakota State just because they're around here. But I'm not a hardcore fan of anybody. The closest college football team I really root for is St. John's, just because I'm on campus and I go to the game. So
I wish.
Anyway, I was just curious.
Yeah. Well, it's dead time right now, and I think this is definitely a relevant subject, especially for people that are listeners that may be attending college next fall. So keep this in mind, guys, because I think most people have probably already made the decisions, but maybe go back and think about that because not going to a football school matters a little bit. So
a little bit.
A little bit. All right, from there, let's hop into our regular programming here. Our plan to discuss the wide receiver and tight end position in the NFC North. Last week we did quarterback and running back. You want to check out the show last week, you can do that as always on the Twitter feed. And I think Drew actually listed our rankings on the Twitter feed, so get in on the debate there as well. Let's hop into wide receivers here, Drew. Which team here? Packers, Vikings, Detroit, Chicago, which has the best wide receiver group? And kind of give me the breakdown of what they're looking at.
I'm going to go from the bottom up here.
Okay.
Just because...
I like that. That's better.
I like to lead with or end kind of, on top. So, the number 4 group I have, this might be a little bit controversial, but I'm going to go Detroit, number 4. Okay. And I think they have kind of some moving parts there. They got brought in a bunch of new guys. Obviously, Golden Tate's there, and he's very reliable. And Marvin Jones is obviously another solid starting caliber player. And after that, you got all kinds of moving parts. And you got Kenny Galladay as a rookie, I think he was a 3rd or 4th rounder. He's probably in line to get a bunch of snaps, and you don't really know what he's going to bring.
Yeah.
So, yeah, exactly. And they brought in Jared Abbrederis from Green Bay. TJ Jones is in there too.
He's been there forever.
It's a wild card type of situation because you don't really know from that group who's going to be that 3rd guy behind Tate and Jones as far as snaps go. So I can't really trust that group as much as I can Chicago's at number 3. When they brought in Kendall Wright, they brought in Victor Cruz, they brought in Ruben Randall. Kevin White's returning. People forget about him. He was a top 10 pick, I believe, back in 2015. So
Marcus Wheaton as well, Victor Cruz.
Yep, and Cameron Meredith too, who was a decent counterpart to Alshon Jeffrey.
Danny Braverman is a guy to kind of keep an eye on too for Chicago. Yeah. It's a nice slot receiver that they got there.
Yeah, so it's not the worst group of receivers that Glennon and Trubisky have to work with, but it's not
kind of an island of misfit toys in Chicago. Yeah. It's a lot of guys that are either over the hump, like Victor Cruz, or guys that are trying to prove themselves, trying to prove their draft position, like like Ruben Randall or Kendall Wright, 2 guys that kind of fizzled out. Kevin White as well. The ceiling is very good in this group. There's a lot of talent. There's a couple first-round picks. There's a couple of early-round picks.
Right.
So I think your take
it's a mixed bag for sure. I'm going to go with the Vikings number 2. I think, obviously Diggs and Thielen are the real deal, and I think they're better than every receiver in the division, I think, besides one player on Green Bay. But after that, I think there are enough question marks for me to be concerned. We don't really know about Laquan Treadwell yet, and right now he's kind of the guy in line to get the third most snaps. Michael Floyd's obviously got a bunch of talent, but again, I kind of need to see it first. After kind of, his production went down last year. And obviously he can still play, and I think for sure you would agree on that. And I think a lot of people kind of forget the way that kind of last season kind of was rough for him moving into New England, and that offense is very complex. But again, you got to see it from him after
he's got to come in and prove himself for
the
sure.
off-field stuff, right? And then you got a few rookies back there in Minnesota, and Jarius Wright, and there are some question marks. There's obviously some talent at depth, but putting that on the field and turning it into production is a different story. So, and then number one is Green Bay. I think Jordy Nelson, I think, is the best receiver in the division. Randall Cobb is not an elite slot option, but I think he's more than serviceable, and I think he's well equipped in that offense with McCarthy and Rodgers. Devontae Adams, after a terrible 2015 season, kind of turned it around a bit in 2016 and made himself useful.
Stop dropping passes.
Yeah, exactly. Geronimo Allison came out of nowhere and showed up a little bit for Green Bay, kind of as that fourth option. So
it's a guy that our guy Zach Jacobson really likes. He's talked about him quite a bit.
Yes, for sure. Yeah. So I mean, it's not a big margin by any means between Green Bay and Minnesota, but I do have the Packers number one as far as my wide receivers list is concerned.
Okay, so my list is actually quite a bit different than Drew's. I've got number 4. I've got Chicago. I kind of explained this while Drew was talking about it, but it's an island of misfit toys. You don't know what you're getting out of this group. Obviously, there's a ton of talent. Kevin White is potentially the most talented receiver in this division on paper. If you look at a grand scheme, this is potentially, there's a reason why he was drafted so high, right? Kendall Wright, same thing could really be said about him. Coming out, I think he was number 17 overall pick a couple of years back going to Tennessee.
Baylor, right?
Yeah, coming out of
Baylor.
Yep. He fizzled out real quick, and now he's in Chicago, so plenty of talent there as well. I have question marks with Ruben Randall, especially because he has bounced around. I feel like he's kind of just done. I think that he's probably a cut on this team, honestly, just because I don't see him. I just don't see it with him anymore.
It has been a couple of years since 2015 was his last season.
When he was relevant. Not even good, relevant. So he hasn't been relevant in a while. And Victor Cruz, you want to see it. He's a guy you want to see it from as well, coming off of multiple injuries and then kind of not really being relevant again now in New York once the Odell Beckham show took over. So a lot of question marks across that board, a lot of potential, but right now Cameron Meredith, Kevin White, Marcus Wheaton is not a threesome that can compete with any other group in this division as far as I'm concerned. And this is coming from a guy that thinks that Marvin Jones is the most overpaid wide receiver in the NFL. I have Detroit at number 3. Marvin Jones, I think I was harping on this during our first couple episodes. Can't believe that sign. I can't believe they gave him wide receiver 1 money. You guys saw what happened when he went up against Xavier Rhodes last year. Just completely irrelevant. But he's still a talented player. He went over 200.
You were scared a little bit, though, after about 3 weeks, right?
Yeah.
When he had he was leading the league in yards after 4 or 5 weeks. Yeah.
And then he just fell off a cliff. So, not going to say I was surprised, but I was sweating a little bit there. So behind Tate and Jones, like Drew said, not a whole lot. TJ Jones has been around for a while. He's kind of Kenny Golladay is a guy that a lot of people have talked about as being the Treadwell replacement ahead of the draft. So I'm intrigued by what he offers, especially given that Megatron isn't there anymore. So I like this group's upside, and I like their floor considerably more than I like Chicago's, and that's the differentiator there for me. I do think that Chicago has a very talented group, but the floor is considerably lower than Golden Tate and Marvin Jones up top. So that leads us into number 2. I have Green Bay second. I actually have Minnesota number 1 here. The reason why I have Green Bay 2 is because I think that Stephon Diggs is a better wide receiver than Jordy Nelson. You can say what you want about that. I think that Jordy Nelson is getting older. I think that Stephon Diggs proved last year that when he is healthy, and that's a big if, given what we've seen from him in his career, he's the best receiver in this division. Adam Thielen is the number 3 in this division as far as I'm concerned, behind Jordy Nelson being the number 2. After that, you get a toss-up. Who do you like more between Michael Floyd and Devontae Adams? I personally like Michael Floyd just because Devontae Adams is, honestly, Michael Floyd has proved more than Devontae Adams has through both their careers that are relatively similar in length. So I like the Vikings' top 3 receivers, and given that there's not going to be a whole lot of 4 wide receiver sets, at least I don't expect there to be, I would rank the top 3 Vikings receivers in Diggs, Thielen, and Floyd, or Treadwell, pick your poison, I guess, as better than Cobb, Nelson, and Devontae Adams. And Cobb, I'm a known Cobb hater as well. That's a guy that I don't think he's good at all. I think we proved it 2 years ago when Nelson tore his ACL and he was kind of forced to be the number 1 target, and he disappeared. He needs someone on the outside to take coverage away from him. I just don't think he's that good. He's like Drew said, he's a serviceable wide receiver, but there's a reason why Green Bay is going to cut him after this season. You can take that to the bank. That's going to happen. So, or maybe not cut, but he's not going to be re-signed. I can't remember where his contract terms are at, but he's not going to be in Green Bay next year. That's my point. So unless you got any final takes on the wide receiver spot, we'll move on to tight ends then.
I think my thing with Chicago is I think they have enough, like, they're shooting so many darts at the dartboard that at least one of them is going to be a bullseye. You know what I'm saying? So, like, Victor Cruz obviously was a stud when he was in the league, and he's kind of up in the air as far as what he still has left. But and same kind of deal with Kendall Wright, and then Kevin White as well. Like, I feel like one of those guys eventually is going to be their number 1 guy and be a really turn out really well for Glennon and or Trubisky. So, talent-wise, I think that surpasses Detroit quite a bit.
I would agree with you. Talent-wise, yeah.
3 guys right there. Yeah, 3 guys right there that are, if they can find that potential that they have, I guess for Cruz, if they have left, I think you're looking at a really solid group, I think, for Trubisky and Glennon to kind of, take the reins in Chicago with, I guess.
Yeah, so we'll see, obviously, what happens in Chicago there. Chicago actually has a very nice, interesting tight end situation, too. So let's just hop right into that. Chicago, like I just said, they brought in Adam Shaheen was the guy that they decided to bring in with one of their early round picks after mortgaging their future to bring Trubisky in. So Shaheen joined Zach Miller and a couple guys that I'm not very familiar with in Deion Sims and Ben Broniker. I would assume that that's probably a 2 tight end group. I don't see 3 tight ends there that'll make the roster.
Michael Pruitt, though.
Yeah, Michael Pruitt is he's somewhere. I mean, I wonder what's going on with his career. He's not currently listed on the active depth chart, so
really,
yeah. So I mean, take what you want out of Chicago there. Detroit is a little bit more, they're pretty top-heavy in my opinion. Eric Ebron up top is a very solid number 1. Yep. Obviously, they paid a top 10 pick to get him. Darren Fells, more of a blocking tight end, not really an impact guy in terms of receiving. Michael Roberts is a guy they drafted this year and a guy that I didn't watch a whole lot of film on and wasn't very impressed. That's why I kind of didn't watch a whole lot more. So they're top-heavy there. Tight end in Green Bay, obviously they bring in Martellus Bennett. They got Richard Rodgers still. He's been there forever. They also brought in Lance Kendricks. That's a guy that was in St. Louis or now L.A. for a while. He's kind of irrelevant. So it's, again, another fairly top-heavy group. And then the tight end group that we already discussed in Minnesota earlier on this show here that I described as being potentially weak if Rudolph goes down, and Kyle Rudolph, Bucky Hodges, and David Morgan. So how do these 4 teams rank out, Drew?
Number 4 for me is Detroit, which is funny because Ebron tore apart the Vikings last year. But I look at their depth and I don't see a whole lot. Darren Fells is pretty meh to me. So I just don't think there's a whole. So Detroit is my number 4 group, and number 3 is Green Bay. Martellus Bennett obviously is a real rock solid receiving weapon. He's going to do a lot for that offense because I think he's going to be what they kind of anticipated Jared Cook being. Not that Jared Cook was bad, but
he's
I think
he's a more stable version for sure.
Yeah, I think they had higher hopes for Cook, so I think Bennett's going to fill that role, and that should be scary for a lot of Vikings fans because, again, the whole tight end problem, Bennett is there to exploit it. And then Richard Rodgers, besides that Hail Mary catch, he doesn't really get a whole lot of love. He kind of does some dirty work that goes unnoticed, I think. So I like.
He does make their two tight end set whole. He is. Yeah. You do have to account for him. He's not the type of guy that. Right. There's a reason why he caught that Hail Mary, right? It's because someone chose not to account for him, and he made him pay.
Yeah.
So he's capable in that way.
So they're third because I don't like Kendricks, as you said, and if one of those guys goes down, there's issues. So third is Green Bay, and number 2, I've gone back and forth about this one throughout the show, and I think I know where you're going to go here. So I'm going to say Minnesota's number 2, and I'm going to say that because obviously we know Rudolph. He had a career year last year and developed a pretty clear rapport with Bradford, but after that, it's very unknown. David Morgan missed a lot of action last year. I really like the guy. I think, again, that Klein-Sasser role, I love when players fill that Klein-Sasser role, and he seems to have that skill set. And obviously Bucky Hodges, though, he's basically a wide receiver. So, the tight end position itself, you really have 2 guys you're looking at, with Rudolph and Morgan still hasn't played a whole lot, so you can't really expect you don't really know what to expect there. And then for number 1, I like Zach Miller quite a bit in Chicago. He kind of, the last couple of years, he's really kind of burst onto the scene as a receiving tight end. It's been late in his career, unfortunately, but he's an all-around player, too. He can block as well.
It's always had great
and hands. I really like, and I like Adam Shaheen, too. That's kind of he was very underrated. Nobody knew a whole lot about him in the draft.
Coming out of Ashland, it's tough, yeah. So
right, yeah, exactly. So at 6'6" or whatever he is, big body. I think those two can be a really good pair. And again, with that receiving group, they have kind of that wild card, hit or miss receiving group that could be the Bears. I'm not saying the Bears are going to be great and make the playoffs or anything, but I think we've kind of doubted Mitch Trubisky quite a bit, but I think he'll have some weapons to work with, and I think that's at least maybe enough to get him started, hopefully. But there's my list of
this group, just the tight ends in this division. There are a couple of very good ones. I think Rudolph and Bennett are probably and Ebron are probably the top 3. That's why they're listed atop the 3 depth charts. I think that Rudolph is the best tight end in this division. I think that Martellus Bennett is probably, I go back and forth between Martellus Bennett and Eric Ebron. I think I like Ebron a little bit more just because Matthew Stafford is kind of more prone to attack. I think that he'll be more prone to getting targets with Matthew Stafford as opposed to Aaron Rodgers, who will spread it all around the field and be more of a quarterback than Stafford is in that regard in terms of hitting the right guys. Stafford has a tendency to throw it up to the guy that maybe not open but give him a chance. That's he's a gunslinger in that way.
He's a gunslinger, yeah.
So I'm going for number 4 for me. And this is it's complete revert. It's very different from Drew's list. Number 4 for me is Chicago. I like Zach Miller. I just don't think he's that. I don't think he's that good. He's not a difference-making tight end. He's very. He gets the job done.
He's a high floor, low ceiling type of guy.
Yes, yeah, exactly. He gets the job done. He's going to catch passes. He's a good safety net, but he's not a game breaker. And Adam Shaheen is a guy that I think also needs a lot of work. He's not like Bucky Hodges in that he needs a lot of work. He's a little bit more refined in terms of being an inline tight end. But he does need some work in blocking and all that kind of stuff. So I just don't think he's a true tight end either at this point. So that's why they rank number 4. Number 3 for me, extremely top-heavy Detroit. Eric Ebron's great. After that, pretty much garbage. So if Ebron goes down, I wouldn't expect the tight end position to get a whole lot of tread in Detroit. But he is very good. It takes tight ends a while to kind of get going. You saw it happen with Vernon Davis, Jimmy Graham, Rob Gronkowski. All these guys took a while to burst onto the scene. Even Antonio Gates. And now it seems like Ebron's starting to hit his stride. And he's starting to look like the top 10 pick that he was, even if it wasn't a great pick. I think a lot of Detroit fans still want Odell Beckham back. but you know what I'm saying. So,
probably, yeah.
He's a good player. He obviously torched the Vikings a couple times, so he keeps that pack afloat. And actually, as a whole, I like Ebron and Fells more than I like Shaheen and Miller, just as a tandem, assuming health all around. Of course, if Ebron gets hurt and Miller gets hurt and it's Shaheen versus Fells, I think it's a pretty obvious which one I would take there. But assuming health, I like Detroit third. 2, Green Bay. I mean, Minnesota's got a great tight end group too. It's very top heavy, but Detroit is extremely top heavy as well. Green Bay is also very top heavy. If Bennett goes down, I mean, Richard Rodgers, we just talked about him. He gets the job done. You have to account for him, but he's not a flashy guy. Martellus Bennett is the true weapon there. He's been healthy for most of his career, so that's a good sign for them. But as a whole, top-heavy group like the most of this division. The Vikings have, in my opinion, the most well-rounded tight end group. They have the most talented tight end in Kyle Rudolph. He's the best tight end in the division, in my opinion. Bucky Hodges offers a ton of versatility at that position. He's kind of a situational guy at this point. David Morgan, again, I really like David Morgan's hands. I think that he is more than just that Klein-Saucer role. I don't know how much more, but I think he is more than just that role. So I do like him, and I think that the Vikings overall, assuming health, have the most complete tight end group. But if Rudolph goes down, there's a real problem there. Same can be said if Bennett goes down, Ebron goes down. Honestly, the most capable recovery team in terms of losing their top tight end is probably Chicago, just because if Miller goes down, you bring in Shaheen, and it's kind of a fluid transition. It's not horrible in terms of losing your top guy, because you might actually be bringing in a guy who's got a higher ceiling.
Right.
But just as a whole, these units, I would take the Vikings unit as number 1, Green Bay number 2, Detroit number 3, and rounding out Chicago at number 4.
So yeah, the thing about this group is that I don't think, in comparison to the rest of the NFL, I don't think none of these teams really boast like a top 10 tight end group, or maybe even top 15.
No.
So the NFC North doesn't flash a lot of talent at tight end.
You won't see a lot of 2 tight end sets. Let's put it that way.
Right, which, I mean, you're not in general in the NFL, but that's just, I guess, the one takeaway is that really the NFC North doesn't have a whole lot to offer at tight end.
I would say this, with regard to the tight end position and with regard to the wide receiver position, the Vikings have the 2 best groups in terms of influencing their running game. The Vikings might have 2 top 5 blocking wide receivers on their roster in Treadwell and Floyd, so that's a huge difference maker in the run game, something that Bennett doesn't offer, something that Richard Rodgers definitely doesn't offer in Green Bay, so that's a difference-making point. Zach Miller is probably the most complete tight end in this division, with exception to Rudolph, and probably... You can make an argument that Miller's actually more complete, well-rounded than Bennett as well, in my opinion. Same with Ebron. So I think the Vikings get the greatest boost from their tight ends and wide receivers in terms of affecting their run game. So that's kind of an inflation tool that I've used to differentiate these groups as well, because I really do think both the wide receivers and tight ends will contribute to a much better running game for the Vikings this year.
Yeah, I'd have to agree with that.
Okay, all right. So, man of few words for sure. I mean, it's a pretty simple take. I think there's not a whole lot of. It's pretty airtight. So
I'll be honest. I'm getting ready for the take 5 right now. So that's what I was focusing on.
All right, so let's jump into the take 5 then. Round out the show with this. Like I said, top 5 Vikings players currently. The best Vikings on this team heading into the 2017 season, according to us. This isn't about positional value, because obviously the quarterback position would be number 1. This is about the best players relative to their positions overall on this team. So think Madden ratings. The top 5 guys, in our opinions, that would get the highest Madden ratings. That's probably the best way to put it, I think, because it is so subjective on the NFL Network stuff. So, Drew, why don't you get us started here with any honorable mentions you want, and count us down.
Yep. I have one honorable mention, and it is the only offensive player that I will discuss, and it is Sam Bradford. I say this over and over. He's underappreciated after 2016. What he did in the circumstances he was given, 3 offensive coordinators. He had basically a week and a half before the season started to really get into the flow with the Minnesota Vikings. He came in, won 5 games in a row, won the home opener at US Bank Stadium against the Green Bay Packers with really the best game of his career. He was constantly all season under pressure and just delivered. Obviously there are weaknesses in his game, but that he may or may not overcome. But at the same time, what he is right now is an elite arm talent that makes any throw you need him to make, and with the right guys around him, he can win. So I just wanted to say that bit because, again, I think he's getting shafted by the Vikings fan base just because of the circumstances with Teddy Bridgewater. But anyway, I'll get into the list now. I have 5 defensive guys I want to highlight. Number 5 is Everson Griffin, Pro Bowl defensive end, a leader really on that defensive line unit, an awesome character. Love his personality, and of course he's an amazing talent. That fake spin move I remember against Seattle in that playoff game was unreal. Number 4 is Danielle Hunter. I really think this guy is going to be possibly a Hall of Famer. The way his career arc right now. I mean,
yeah, it's looking that
that's
way.
not a hot take. That's not a hot take by any means, at least to me. So he's only 22. We don't know if he's going to start or if B-Rob's going to start or what the deal is. I would assume Hunter's taking that starting role, but I would expect big things for him. Number 3 is Xavier Rhodes at corner. He really turned into a shutdown corner last year. Now this year's kind of his big kind of prove it. Like, all right,
it's the prove it season. Yeah.
The prove it season. Now I am an elite cornerback type of year. If he can replicate what he did last year, he will be an elite player in my opinion. Linval Joseph is number 2. Just eats up blockers like it's nobody's business. He's a bit, for how big of a man he is. He's also very quick, and he's disruptive. I mean, he's also underrated because of the position he's at as well, where he's not loading up on stats, but he just does his job. He does it well, and he's a focal point in Mike Zimmer's defense, just as my number 1 player Harrison Smith is. Plays that kind of edge ceiling role in the run game, where he kind of holds off that edge, forces the runner to cut back. He really does everything you want out of the safety position. He can play the free safety spot. He can play strong safety. He does it all, and he does it all at an elite level. So Harrison Smith is my number 1 player on the Minnesota Vikings.
Okay, I've got, let's see here. When I wrote down my list, I wrote down 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 different players.
Yeah. I figured you would do that, so I tried to keep mine just to those 6, and I let you kind of do the explaining on those other guys. So.
I wrote down 11 guys that I think warrant consideration. I think that some of these guys are easier to knock off than others. Guys that I think are easy to knock out of the top 5, but warrant that have earned our recognition. Terrence Newman, Kyle Rudolph, Sam Bradford, and Anthony Barr. Anthony Barr, had he not fallen off and had he continued at the pace that he was playing in, would have easily made my top 5, but this past season was just not top 5 material, especially with such a stacked group of defensive players particularly, okay. But there are some very strong offensive players as well. I think that Adam Thielen's name should probably be thrown in here as well as not an honorable mention, but a guy that could easily be in this group if we do this list again next year. Moving into the top 5 now. My number 1 honorable mention, since you gave 1 honorable mention, I'm going to give just 1 as well, in addition to the names that I just listed. Danielle Hunter is my honorable mention, and here's why he's not in the top 5. It's a lot of what he brings right now is pass rushing exclusive. He's not the best at setting the edge. I think that Everson Griffin is still clearly the better defensive end here. Just because he's more well-rounded. Yeah. Who is the better pass rusher? Danielle Hunter. Clearly, he's one of the best pass rushers in the league, period, in terms of pressures, in terms of quarterback sacks, knockdowns, all that stuff. He's one of the best pass rushers, period. But which defensive end do I want heading into next year in terms of solidifying my defense? Everson Griffin. And that's why Everson Griffin comes in my top 5, and Danielle Hunter kind of just barely squeaks out. And there's some debate here. I have Stephon Diggs as number 5, so obviously there's some debate between those are 2 guys that have shown major flashes and look like superstar caliber players. but have been hampered by something. For Diggs'
Right.
injuries, for Hunter, it's obviously just playing in a rotational role. But I do have Diggs ranked ahead of him for now, just because I expect a huge season. I expect Diggs to burst onto the scene as a top 15 weapon. I think that you'll really see, if he plays 16 games, I think you'll see him play at an exceedingly high level. So I would say that he's the 5th best player on the Vikings team right now. And unfortunately, he's the only offensive guy on my list as well. So one guy in both of our lists from the offensive side of the football for the Vikings. The defensive side of the ball is outstanding. Like I just said, Everson Griffin comes in at number 4 for me. I kind of already explained that, so there's no real reason to go over that again. Great guy, great motor, great well-rounded skill set. Love his game. He's number 4 for me. Number 3 is Linval Joseph. I mean, Drew explained it best. This guy's an absolute wrecking ball in the middle. You can't stop him at times. It's the only real question marks with him is how many snaps can he be on the field for, because he seems to get gassed quite a bit and he has to have Shamar Stephen come in for him. So just playing only 60%, 70% of the snaps makes him kind of hurts his value relative to the rest of his teammates. And just the fact that he has gotten hurt he's missed a couple games here and there. There's no real question marks. This is obviously an elite player and a guy that I consider to be the best nose tackle in a 4-3 defense in the NFL. But he falls a little bit, and that's because the 2 guys ahead of him are all-pro, first-team caliber, all-pro players, in my opinion. Xavier Rhodes is number 2. Harrison Smith is number 1. Drew explained why Harrison Smith is number 1. I mean, that's just how obvious of a number 1 is it? I think every Vikings fan here knows who the best player on the Vikings is right now. It's Harrison Smith. He's really the only guy on this Vikings team that warrants like a 95 rating, if we're talking Madden again. But Xavier Rhodes is right there with him. I think that I don't think the Madden guys will get it right because they never seem to, but he deserves like a 90. This is a guy that's an elite cornerback right now. He's better than Casey Hayward. I can't believe where he got placed on that.
I'm shocked that you put a cornerback number 1.
Number two. It is a safety number 1, so it's not too far off. But Xavier Rhodes and Harrison Smith. It's not a 1A, 1B situation because Harrison Smith is very, very definitively the best player on this Vikings team. If you can't see that, I don't really know what to tell you, but he just is. He makes that defense everything it needs to be. He's the wrecking ball that can do everything: zone coverage, man coverage, up against the line, pass rushing. I mean, this guy can really do it all. He's the best player on the Vikings. But Xavier Rhodes has, with exception to Harrison Smith on that defense, I think you can make an argument that he probably has the greatest impact on the Vikings defense just because he is able to, or he has shown an ability to shut down receivers with consistency. And like Drew said, I think he's already elite. This next season is the prove it thing for him. Where are you still elite, or are you a one-hit wonder? Or are you are you Vanilla Ice, or are you Drake? I don't know. I don't know what you listen to. Drake, Eminem.
Good comparison.
Eminem's probably better. I don't like Drake. Drake's garbage, but that's my take there. Harrison Smith number 1, Rhodes number 2, Linval Joseph number 3, Everson Griffin number 4, Stephon Diggs number 5. Honorable mention to Neil Hunter, with some strong kudos to Eric Kendricks, who deserved more love here, but it's just he's a prop. Yeah. He's getting kicked out of this top 5 spot because of how talented this defense is all around. I mean, you could make an argument here that there are Pro Bowlers all over the board. Griffin, Hunter, Linval Joseph. If Sharif Floyd is healthy, he's a Pro Bowl caliber player. Rhodes, Newman. I mean, I don't know how good Newman's going to be this year, but last year, definitely an all-pro caliber player. Waynes, I mean, there's question marks, but he could develop into it. Harrison Smith, no doubt. I mean, this defense is absolutely loaded. Anthony Barr's been the Pro Bowl.
We're naming players from literally every position on the defense, which in itself is impressive.
Right, so. Exactly. So, just as a whole, extremely impressive defense. Offense is starting to get there at least, because Adam Thielen and Stephon Diggs and, like Drew mentioned, Sam Bradford deserves more credit than he's getting. So that, I think, rounds out the take 5, unless you got any final wrap-up thoughts there.
I don't. Make sure you're subscribing on all of the available channels in which you can. iTunes, Stitcher, iHeartRadio. I'm trying to remember them all.
Vikings Territory
is in there as well. Yeah.
Google Play is still there. Yeah.
I think.
Twitter, pretty much.
Yeah.
That's where you can find all the links for us. And then YouTube, if you're one of the 200-ish people that watches these recordings live, thanks for doing that. Hopefully you guys are enjoying the video feed as well. Yep. We're working on this. Drew's obviously working out of a dungeon today, so there's not a... For the video viewers, you can see what Drew's operating out of today. But yeah, that about wraps it up. You know where to find us on Twitter at VikingsATL Pod. You know where to find both of us on Twitter. I'm Robert Reidell, Reidell, Drew Mahowald, Mahowald. And yeah, you'll see us again next Tuesday, as per standard, every Tuesday, Thursday. Keep tuning in for us, and hopefully we'll have some more to talk about next week with... Actually, you know what? It's kind of good that the Vikings are staying out of the news. So hopefully we'll be.
This is a good thing.
We'll be continuing on our top 5 list with strictly the offensive line to round out the offense next week. As a whole, we'll do center, tackle, and guard at the same time. So we'll finish out that and then move on to the defensive side of the football. And we will catch you guys next Tuesday, as I said.